Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Should we get going?
Yes, sorry.
As a reminder, please note that this is an audit committee meeting is being recorded for convenience of those unable to attend this meeting. Ade, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Anthony Giordano,
Present.
Shirley Aubin, Frank Cirabella, Kevin Troy, Karine Apollone, Sarita Scott, Alice Ho,
Present.
Manning Tavares, Marjorie Dinstad,
Present.
Naveed Hassan.
Thank you, Ade. We have quorum. Noting of the minutes of March. The first order of business is agenda item number 2, noting of the minutes of the audit committee of BERS held on March 18th, 2025, the day before my birthday, a very special day. The minutes have been previously provided to the committee via the SharePoint site. May I have a motion to consider the minutes from March 18th committee meeting?
Motion.
Second.
Motion by Frank, second by Alice. Do we have a call for acclamation on accepting the minutes? Acclamation. Hearing any opposed? Motion passes. It's double-sided. Yeah. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 3, election of the chair of the audit committee of BERS. Can I have a motion to consider?
Second.
Second by Al, motion by Franks. The chair will rotate annually and should have knowledge of changing issues within the public sector pension administration, enterprise risk management, internal controls, the nature of the internal audit environment, BERS risk profile, and its business priorities. Are there any questions? Can I have a volunteer to be audit committee chair?
I nominate Tony.
Well,
Second.
well, I only served, well, if we have to rotate annually, I only did not even half a year, I don't think, right? Can I do it again? I'll do it again if need be. Does everyone want me to do it again? Because I didn't even really get to have fun with this yet. I was gonna make badges for all of you. I'll accept the nomination. Frank, is there any objection to that?
Nope.
Any other nominations? Alice has to call somebody back.
Yes.
Seeing no other nominations, we'll close the nominations. I am the winner again. Yes, thank you. Good to be me.
I think we have to vote them.
I'll do it. Okay. All in favor of me serving for another year?
Aye.
Aye.
It's a landslide. Motion passes. Okay. Executive directors update. Chair newly elected.
Yeah, I'm saving that for the Board of Trustees at 4, so I would ask that anyone who attends this meeting, attend that meeting, and I would just congratulate our audit team for excellent work.
Certainly echoed. Thank you, Sandy. That was great and informative update. Internal audit directors update.
Good afternoon, everyone. So on the agenda today, as always, I'm going to update the committee on the audits that were completed since the last meeting, give you a status update on the findings that are outstanding for prior audits, give an update on ongoing audits. And today we're going to review the internal audit strategy, and I'll talk more about that when we get to that part of the agenda. All right, so the first audit up for discussion today is the SCP audit. So SCP stands for Service Credit Purchase. This is a program that allows members to purchase service that they rendered prior to joining BERS. And the SCP unit usually will calculate the cost of the prior service plus interest. And members are able to pay for this by payroll deduction, lump sum, or transfers from their tax deferred annuity accounts. So for this audit, our objectives were to determine the accuracy and timeliness of calculations, evaluate compliance with plan provisions and applicable laws, and to evaluate the effectiveness of internal controls. And our scope here was prior service transactions processed between January 2022 and December 2023. So there are 4 findings out of this audit, and I'll go over them, starting with the first one. So for our finding number 1, we noted exceptions in the service hours and earnings used for prior service calculations. So based on the SOPM, which we used as criteria for most of this audit, SCP employees are required to gather key details in order to calculate prior service. And those details include the employment period of the member, pensionable earnings, full-time or part-time work hours, or both. And whenever this information is not available in part or in full, the unit is required to contact the member to obtain that information. Now, once that information is gathered, it's entered into an Excel spreadsheet, and the prior service credits available for purchase is calculated. Once that amount is determined, that information is then entered into CPMS, and CPMS calculates the cost and breaks that out into principal and interest. So for our audit, we pulled a sample of 44 calculations to determine whether that process was adhered to and whether accurate information was used to calculate the prior service in accordance with the SOPM requirements. So what we found was that of the 14 samples that we pulled, 16 of them were calculated based on average hourly rates instead of using the actual hours that were worked. And that resulted in service credits that were not equal to the actual hours worked, depending on.
Can you repeat that again?
So the requirement is to credit the service hours worked, but we found instances where the service worked was determined based on average hourly rates. So for employees, their hourly rates may change depending if it's a discretionary raise or union raise, but over time, the rates are not the same, right? They change. So in these instances, an average rate as opposed to the actual rate was used in those calculations.
Is that because the actual data is not available?
In some cases, the actual data is not available, but what we ended up working out with the team was to have a priority order where the actual rates are used, and then if the actual rates are not available, the earnings are available and the hourly rate for those earnings are also available. So we want them to use the actual earnings and the corresponding rates. And then, and then as a last resort, in some weird instances where either one of those is not available, maybe for really old cases, then they could use the hourly rate. But
So take the hourly rate divided into the total earned and then get the hour.
Yes, so because that changes over time, they just took an average and used the total earnings. But it will be closer to accurate if they took the earnings and the corresponding hourly rates for the period for which those are affected.
Is this very, how many members are actually using service credit purchase?
There were quite a few transactions. I would have to look back at the work papers, but in scope, there were just over 1,000 calculations in the 2 years that we looked at. Total number of calculations.
Yes.
Yeah, they do a lot of those
What is that for
calculations.
vesting purposes? Or?
Well, it helps with vesting. It increases your pension when you retire.
And we're gonna see a lot more of that with the auto enrollment. A lot more of it.
So it's credit for service prior to membership. So people will be hired, maybe they're hired last year and they joined BERS this year. So in order to get service credit going back to when they were hired, they would have to pay for it and pay interest.
So makes sense that we'll see a lot of that then.
So as far as actions to be taken, the unit is going to update their SOPM to include that priority order of what to apply in those calculations. And then they will conduct periodic reviews to make sure that they're adhered to. Finding number 2 had to do with record keeping, and we identified discrepancies in the records of service credit. So based on the SOPM again and the established practices, SCP purchases are usually activated in PMS when a payment method election form is received. So when the service is calculated, they send the member a letter with all the details. And then the member has the option of responding because it's actually voluntary. They're not required to purchase for service. So when the member responds, they'll send us what we call the payment method election form indicating how they wish to pay. And then once that is received, the record is activated in the system CPMS, and a record is created of that purchase in the member's account. So what we found in this audit is that when we compared the member account information to the actual calculation that was processed, there were discrepancies. So we found discrepancies in the pensionable earnings, in CPMS, in the employment records, in the actual prior service credits, and a combination of those data points. We also found discrepancies in the cost of prior service recorded in the accounts and the information that was sent to the member. We also compared payment allocation. So when payments were made, they go into the various funds. So whether it's the MCAF, which is the regular pension, or the additional member contribution fund. And we also found discrepancies between the amounts the members paid and what was reported in the account. And then we found instances where we just could not determine the accuracy of the information because there was no supporting documentation on file. And then we noted other miscellaneous discrepancies, particularly with the display. So even though there was accurate information processed, the information displayed in CPMS was just off. So the CPMS, the SCP unit did inform us that they are aware of some of these discrepancies, but they prioritize processing new requests over cleanup and display issues and things like that. So we did recommend that they periodically, do a look back and verify that the information that they processed is accurately reflected in the system, because there is impact to the member, right? So when the member is sent information from the system, there's the potential to send them inaccurate information. We also recommended that those issues in CPMS that are creating those display issues should also be rectified. So what the team is going to do is develop a reconciliation schedule, and they're working with the business information systems management team to identify the issues within CPMS that are causing those problems and have those rectified. Finding number 3 had to do with inconsistencies in processing and interest timelines. So based on the SCP unit's practices, it usually takes around 12 to 24 months to process a prior service application. And when it's processed, the payment date is usually set to 60 days and interest is updated up until that point. If payments are received after that window allotted to the member, they're called late payments and they are to be rejected because interest has to be recalculated. For members who are retiring, their prior service corrections are or calculations are prioritized and are usually typically completed within 90 days of request. So in our audit, we found instances where some cases were processed beyond the 2-year timeframe. And then we also found instances where those payment options that were given to the members were not consistently the 60 days. So there's some members, the dates ranged from as little as 3 days to as much as 118 days. So
Or we
there's
accept payment past the 60 day.
no. So when we send the payment out, we're supposed to give them 60 days to return payment. And there are financial implications because interest is calculated up to those 60 days. So, but in some instances, they were given 3 days. In some instances, they were given 118 days. So the unit did tell us as a disclaimer that sometimes it's based on the member's request. However, there is that disparity in interest. Some people end up paying more and some people end up paying less. So that was an issue that we identified. And then we also noted that some late payment forms were accepted as opposed to being rejected and updated with interest. And then lastly, we found that for the retiring members, their accounts were not punctually updated within the 90 days. And these inconsistencies, like I said, can result in overcharging some members or undercharging some members. So we did recommend they update their SOPM to reflect standard timelines for processing, so everyone is on the same page as far as how much time is allotted to return the payment. We also recommended that they implement stricter controls to make sure that those members who are retiring are actually prioritized and processed quicker. And also, we recommended that they implement controls to make sure that when late payments are received, they are updated with interest or returned to the member. So management will be implementing those recommendations. They will update their SOPM to reflect those timelines. And they agreed with implementing stricter controls and monitoring after processing to make sure that they're following the process. And then the last finding for this audit had to do with segregation, which is something we look for in pretty much almost every audit. It's a basic key control that helps to prevent fraud, helps with catching errors early, things like that. So the SCP processing manual requires that when one employee processes a prior service transaction, another employee comes in and verifies, and then the supervisor approves. And then for corrections, only the supervisor or their assistant is allowed to update or implement corrections. So in the audit, we noted that a few cases were not independently verified after they were processed. They were done by the same employee. And for prior service corrections where only a supervisor or assistant is allowed to process, we found another employee who wasn't a supervisor or assistant actually processed. So the absence of segregation increases the risk of errors or fraud, errors going undetected or fraud occurring. So we did recommend that they strengthen their segregation controls and make sure that they're enforced, preferably through the system. And management did agree. They are going to conduct a review of user access and roles and make sure that they implement segregation of duties with the prior service calculations. And then they're also going to request an audit trail mechanism. That way they know who processed what and when. So that's it for the SCP audit. Are there any questions?
When was the last time this audit was taking place?
This audit we started this late last year. We reported this in March 17th.
This is the first time though.
No worries.
Oh, yeah, this is the first
This is the
SCP
first audit.
audit, yeah.
Oh, very thorough as we expect from you. Always a day. And seems like a lot of findings, but I'm sure the team will be, sure we'll be better next time.
Yeah, and they're actually doing a fantastic job. SCP processing is a very complicated process. It's a complicated process and they often have limited data to work with. So someone could be applying today for service from 1975. And so digging up that data, making it make sense, it can be very challenging.
How many people are on the team?
There are 4 people on the team currently. Let me just double check that. Yeah, 4 staff members, and that includes the supervisor. And I believe they're going to be requesting more headcount, and we did put that in the report that they should evaluate.
Got it.
Yeah, more resources.
You can
Because
more about that at the board meeting.
Well, you have a piece of swag that I don't have.
A piece of
Your
swag.
vest. Your vest, why do you have enough?
Well, that's Paulette Couture. She does that especially for me. I'm the only one.
Can you audit that, please?
Sure. Yeah, so I think it'll be helpful for them to get more resources to bring down that timeline of 2 years, like waiting for it to be processed. So
And it seems like there's a lot of common sense that goes to it. Retirees are prioritized. Maybe not the moving timeline of dealing with them, but
all right, so audit number 2 is the tax deferred annuity or TDA audit. So the TDA program is a supplement to the pension, right, that allows additional savings towards retirement. So in the TDA program, eligible members, so TDA eligible members will be members in education service. And they can invest in the fixed or the variable program on the pre-tax or more recently on the post-tax basis. Contributions to the TDA program are voluntary and members can start, stop at any time, change their rates at any time, and change their investment allocation at any time. So for this audit, our objectives were to determine accuracy and timeliness in processing, compliance with plan provisions, policies, procedures, and also to determine the effectiveness of internal controls. And like with the prior audit, our scope was investment changes processed between January of 2022 and December of 2023. So when we use the term investment changes, we're referring to changes to contribution rates. So members are allowed to contribute up to 85% subject to the goal amount set by the IRS. And we also use that term to refer to allocation changes. So members can invest between fixed and variable, and they can move their funds between those buckets as well. All right, so findings for this audit. So finding number one was segregation. So based on the SOPM, an investment change is to be processed by one individual and verified by another, and then it gets routed to the supervisor for approval. So we pulled a sample of 40 investment changes, and 93% of those were processed and verified by the same individual. That was unusually high for what we usually find when it comes to segregation. And then we also noted that there was no supervisory approval within CPMS. We didn't really take issue with that because we agree with the team that supervisory approval for TDA investment changes is not necessary, and that it would suffice if they have two separate individuals. One person processes and the other person verifies. So they will be updating their SOPM to reflect that eventually. So what we recommended here was that the segregation is enforced, preferably systematically, meaning having the system prevent one individual from fulfilling both roles within the system. So management agreed, and I believe they already submitted a request to have that enforced in CPMS, and they will.
Was it in the workflow previously?
It's there, but it's not enforced.
Because the system doesn't demand a second.
Right, doesn't stop the same person from. So they submitted a request to BISM already, and they're hoping to see that update at the end of next year, which is it's far off, but generally with CPMS updates, they take a while to come through. So finding number two had to do with timeliness. So based on the SOPM and established practices in the TDA unit, it usually takes about 60 days to implement a rate change from the date it was received. And then for allocation changes, the requirement is for the request to be received 30 days before the end of a calendar quarter. So the allocation changes are effective 4 times a year at the start of every quarter. So the members have to submit the request 30 days before before the start of the new quarter. And requests are accepted in person, by mail, or by fax. And members are also able to request those changes online via MSS. And in those instances, there's no human intervention. They submit the request and it gets processed automatically. So what we found is that some contribution rate changes became effective over 60 days after they were received. And then in the case of allocation changes between fixed and variable, some took effect up to 5 months after they were received. And then we also noted that for forms received by fax, what they're doing is using a receipt date that's later than the fax date. So when members fax in the forms, they're received and then subsequently stamped with a received date, which is later than fax date. And that cause some delays, especially for transactions that are time driven. So,
Actually actionable if there's some difference in calculation, right? In terms of-
yes. So what we recommended that they accept the fax date as the official date of receipt, as long as they have appropriate controls in place, right? So the fax date is clear, it's stamped, and there's a record of receipt on that particular date. We also recommended that they establish some automated monitoring controls that will help them to identify and rectify requests that are aging in the system. And also will report on deviations from the timelines, and also help them address any bugs or system failures that are causing these delays. So management did tell us that they don't have control over the dates that are stamped, and their processing is strictly driven by those stamp dates. So that's a discussion that we're going to have later on. I'm going to try to bridge something between the teams and the records department to see how we can bridge that gap, because there are implications for the members when if I fax in the form, I expect that the date that is faxed in to be the date that it's received.
When you say stamp, that's when, the same day as it's scanned into the system, right?
No, they actually will do a clock
And
stamp.
then it's
clock date.
subsequently scanned, and it's at the scan date that it really is the kickoff of the workflow.
Yes, the scanning kicks off the workflow, but then when the teams pick it up, they're looking at that date that was stamped on it as the receipt date. So what the actions that they're going to take include daily review of the queue by the supervisor to make sure that forms are moving through quickly and being processed. And they're also going to review a weekly workflow report that goes to the supervisor.
How many people are in this department?
There, I believe, are 4 people. Let me confirm that really quickly. Yeah, 4 staff members, including the supervisor. And I believe we'll be asking for more.
That's, I mean, we could expect another, we got 20,000 new enrollees, none of them have TDAs, and it's gonna be outreach, call center, marketing materials, enrollments. These will grow over the next few years.
We do this in conjunction with TRS, right?
Mhm.
No, well, the TDA variable is managed by TRS.
But this aspect of the transactions is solely in-house. All right, so third finding had to do with inaccurate records being kept in the system and some data entry errors that we identified. So usually when forms are received, like I mentioned, they're processed by entering the date that they were received, the request from the member, which will usually be a percentage. So they'll tell us how much they want us to take from their paycheck. They'll tell you how much of that should be invested in the fixed and the variable, and that allocation has to add up to 100. And then the staff will also enter the effective periods in CPMS. So our audit identified with the contribution changes that even though they were accurately processed, CPMS did not reflect the new rates on the correct effective dates. And in one of the cases, the rate was not displayed at all in CPMS, even though the team processed it accurately. We found an instance where the rate did not hit the member's paycheck, basically. So the rate wasn't applied. And then we also found a couple of instances where the wrong rate was entered into the system. And then we summarized that these discrepancies were due to systemic issues. So CPMS is having an issue with displaying the correct information. There were some data entry errors, and there was insufficient post-processing review. So specifically, they did not go back in to review, or at least do a sample to make sure that the transactions entered were processed correctly. So we recommended that they do some post-processing review and reach out to the vendor or BISM to rectify the system issues. So what the team is doing is that they've submitted a request to have the system reviewed to determine what's causing those errors within the system. And then they will, in the meantime, run a periodic report of inconsistencies to make any corrections that are needed. System update is expected to happen in June of next year. So lastly, improperly completed forms were accepted and processed. And the risk with that is there's opportunity for fraud, and there's also opportunity to process inaccurate transactions. Okay, so based on the SOPM and the practices established by the team, all forms must be reviewed and verified for accuracy prior to processing. And the things that they would review would include notarization, making sure that the address that the request is bearing matches the address on record in CPMS. And then they also make sure that the member's request is correctly written. So if they're doing an allocation between fixed and variable, they must add up to 100 and things like that. So from our sample, we noticed that there were some issues with notarization. One form was not notarized. Some addresses did not match the member profile, and some contribution rates were not properly written. However, those forms were not rejected according to procedure. And they did result in, I think, 1 or 2 processing errors. So what we recommended is that they adhere to their intake procedures, right? So the procedure is that if the form is not properly corrected, they seek correction or they work with the member-facing teams to have the forms corrected, or then they reject the form if all of that fails. So we recommended that they adhere to those procedures. So what they're doing as far as rectifying this is enforcing that preparer and verifier again, just to make sure that the verifier will catch any errors that the preparer misses. The supervisor is also going to review rejections on a monthly basis, just to make sure everything was appropriately done. And then they will be updating their SOP and those procedures. So that's it for the TDA audit. Are there any questions?
Did you track what percentage of the changes are processed through MSS?
I don't think track, but we can give you that number, but it would just be based on our audit scope.
Right.
Can you explain that to us?
So you can do all this through member self-service online. I do it that way. And it kind of skips past a lot of these control points.
Right. So assuming it's older people who are using.
Yeah, fax,
Right.
sending in the document.
Where do you even send fax?
Yeah.
All right, so
It's facts now.
Okay.
The question is, I was in my mind thinking, do you guys have a preference and or what are your numbers? for each
Assuming
fax
MSS for
or-
preference at all.
And it's mainly.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I gotta believe we're migrating more towards MSS. And we also have the new box document submission process, which postdates this, but
Well, I know we're rambling potentially towards some kind of discrepancies with TRS in terms of numbers. This does not have anything to do with that, though.
no, the discrepancies with TRS are all about investment returns.
Okay.
Cash balances, stuff like that. Nothing to do with this.
okay, so this is just a quick update on ongoing audits. Pension benefit payments. So we're looking at pension benefits to make sure that they're being paid accurately, timely, in accordance with, regulations and policies. And then we recently kicked off payroll procedures. So payroll procedures is residing in HR. We're just looking at timekeeping records, authorizations, payroll changes, union retro, managerial increases, and all of that. So we're looking at that in this audit. And then the DFS audit, I still have that here lingering because we're still waiting on the final report. We got a draft report over a year ago now.
So they were behind, right? That they've been behind in auditing of us before.
We're actually expecting them to be, I think they audit us once every 5 years. So we're due for the next one any day.
Yeah. The history is kind of disappointing though. The 5-year audit, which predates the one we're waiting for.
Right.
never actually completed.
That's what I.
And then this
And
one,
then there was the controller's request of DFS to look at us, right? And that was,
which was the same, basically the same thing.
and the findings were negligible, if anything.
Well, the findings actually were positive for us. They attacked the actuary and the actuary cut their head off.
That
Actually, they actually got an industry level sanction for the actuary. Because he was wrong on almost everything he said. And it wasn't because he was a bad actuary, it's because he had no experience with pension actuarial
Oh,
science.
this wasn't,
He was an insurance actuary.
this was prior, this is the
Yeah,
actuary.
you can ask Merrick about that later today if you're interested. Actually, I said it was sanctioned. I know he applied for sanction to sanction the guy, but nobody actually did.
No.
All right, so this is an update on the findings that have been remediated since the last meeting. And this is for the findings that were in the higher risk category, right? So a semi-annual report has been implemented to identify members without beneficiaries. So this was out of the enrollment audit where we found that there was no follow-up with new members to make sure that they filed beneficiaries. So now they're pulling a report twice a year to identify those new members without beneficiaries and are reaching out to them. For financial reporting, this is actually an audit from 2020, one of the first ones we did when we started the internal audit department. So some financial reports are now available in CPMS. However, additional improvements are needed and additional testing will be done on those reports. Members that are approaching the 5-year out mark, when they're within that 1-year time frame of becoming 5-year out, when their account becomes dormant, they are now being contacted and advised of their options. When it comes to dormant account statuses, the QA team, quality assurance team, they've implemented a process where on a monthly basis, they're pulling account statuses and sampling them to rectify any issues that they find. And then for adjustments, so adjustments are when they're making changes to member accounts. So say somebody purchased prior service like we just discussed, and it's not accurately reflected in the account. Sometimes the SCP team is not able to effect that correction. So they'll refer that to the QA team and it's called an adjustment. So if there's an adjustment that's $5,000 or more, the team is pulling that and reviewing that for accuracy on a monthly basis. Cloud backup has been procured by the IT team. That was ongoing for a while. And then lastly, cybershift training was conducted for new hires and supervisors. And then just looking at the chart really quickly. So in terms of numbers, 11 of those findings were remediated since the last meeting and 42 are still outstanding. And then roughly 70% from a holistic perspective of all the audit findings are fully remediated. And about 30% are being actively worked on. And then just to talk about some of those outstanding high-risk findings. So the first one is prior service, right? So like I said, the team will be conducting a reconciliation of prior service calculations, comparing that to the account information, just to make sure that both numbers jive. And they hope to have that done by the end of this year. And then members with inaccurate membership dates. This also came from the enrollment audit where we found that some permanently appointed members had inaccurate membership dates. So that is being reviewed and should be completed next month. Suspension of participant accounts for suspicious activity. I believe legal is working with BISM. I was copied on an email recently regarding that. They should have that process straightened out by next month also. Segregation of duties for manual refunds, that's awaiting a CPMS update that should be coming through pretty soon. And then the variable annuity fund, which you were talking about short time ago, Tony, there's still no contract in place between BERS and TRS. So that's the fund that TRS manages for us. And we're required to have a contract in place, and the contract is to be reviewed every 5 years. But there's no record of any contracts.
Never, like over 50 years.
Yeah, so.
We're right in the same building, so there's not a lot of excuses not to get it done.
They're not returning our calls. That's basically the excuse.
I know them. I know them over there. I'm not surprised.
And then the last item is a privileged access management solution that the IT department is in the process of procuring.
What's that about?
So it's for members on their team with privileged access, right? So those that have administrator access and things like that. So they need to be able to have a tool that manages their passwords and the availability of that information. So they're procuring a tool for that.
Sounds secret.
They were previously kept on a flash drive, which was an
Okay.
issue.
That's not good.
If for 50 years we didn't have a contract, why is it becoming an issue now?
That's what-
This lack of a formal contract between TRS and us for the variable annuity fund. Why is it an issue now after 50 years?
So it's required by law that we have that contract in place and that it's reviewed once every 5 years.
It's partially my fault. In the first year I was here, I started investigating this and I accused them of being poor advisors because our returns were so awful in Jersey. And then I followed that up with requests and they basically they continue to ignore us. And the returns continue to lag easily accessible alternatives for members.
With the guaranteed, I don't have guaranteed returns, right? Well, in the.
There is, and one of the problems with all this stuff is the legislation which created the TDA variable is bizarre in the extreme, which created 50 years ago. It has a balloon feature, which increases the number of shares that you have as a participant automatically. It has limitations on when you can change, limitations on how fast you can get your money out.
It seems like another.
And it complicates things because what's interesting is that there's a difference between the balances that we think are there and TRS thinks are there, mostly because of timing differences. So unlike your Vanguard account, where you know what it's worth today, and you call Vanguard and say, I want to cash out today, they will know the next day how much you have and your cash is available within 48 hours. Legislation requires to get, what is it, 30 days notice? I think it's 30 days notice of a withdrawal, and basically in that 30 days, the market can go up or down, up and down, up or down, and
It's crazy.
so there's differences.
30 days.
Yeah, it's mostly the legislation which causes this bizarre
This was probably payouts from.
mismatches.
Benefit from the city's from the unions bailing out the city in the 70s.
Well, I don't know about that, but I know that, so.
A lot of this positive legislation came from.
When Stringer was the controller, he basically made us take our portion of the TDA and merge it with the QPP, right? So we had a separate TDA account and it was accumulating 8.25 and it was being funded directly. But transactions which were mismatched in time had accumulated a credit balance of almost $300 million. And when they merged with QPP, $300 million went into the QPP and relieved the city of contribution. Yeah.
And I think that probably for the contract is be a lot of review of this stuff that would create a lot of headaches for a lot of people.
Antonio and I tried to lever the TDA out of New York and give it to someone like Vanguard in an RFP. The lawyers couldn't weave an RFP which matched the legislation that would allow someone like Vanguard to bid. They just couldn't do it because the technology is instant in the world. And for us, it's 15 to 45 days delayed, everything. And it's in legislation. So we can't just, I used to argue, well, this is a minimum requirement, right? And the lawyers would say, no, it's not a minimum requirement. That's what you have to do. Okay.
Interesting.
We can't make it better. No, you got to do exactly what legislation says. So, we boiled it down to asking for a contract now.
Okay.
So next up is an update on external audits. And this specifically is the audit from the controller's office that was reported out last fall. So the bylaws are being revised, and you will see that at the board meeting. I believe it's on the agenda for today. So that was a recommendation from the controller's office. Procurement, very specific procurement policies and procedures are being drafted. This was delayed because a new director of contracts and procurement was
Our
recently
third.
onboarded.
Third director of procurement in the last 4 years,
Yeah.
but she's great now.
Yeah, so that should be completed shortly. And then the third one is from fiscal ops, right? So bank recs are being done on a 4-month lag due to staffing shortages, but they hope to bring that lag down to 2 months by Q1 of fiscal year 26.
But again, to reiterate, we are doing the reconciliations regularly, just not formally.
Yes, so they're not doing the classic end of month solutions at the end of every month, but they eventually catch up like at the end of the fiscal year and they do the rec for
And
every.
it gets externally audited every once a year, which is starting. It actually, we had the first call yesterday. Yeah, there's no money slipping through that gap, if there is a gap. But we're remediating, extend that, their recommendation.
Good word, remediate.
All right, so next up is the internal audit strategy. So as I mentioned last meeting, so the global internal audit standards issued by the IIA, Institute of Internal Auditors, require that we develop an internal audit strategy. And they also require that that strategy is reviewed with the board and senior management periodically. So the intention of the strategy is to guide us, the internal audit function, towards fulfilling our mandate. The requirements from the standards are that we have a vision, strategic objectives, and supporting initiatives to achieve those objectives. In our strategy document, we also included other key elements like the succession plan, resource allocation plan, development plan for staff, competency framework, and all of those things, just to make sure everything is in one document that can be referenced by the team and by senior management and the board. So just going into our mission really quickly. So our mission as a team is to support PERS. That's where it starts and stops, right? We want to be able to provide assurance and advisory services that are independent, objective, and risk-based, and that will help strengthen the governance processes at PERS, risk management and controls processes. And our vision is where we hope to be, where we're striving towards, and that is to be a high-performing team that's technology-enabled, and that will allow us to deliver impactful insights to management and support of objectives. So that, in a nutshell, is our mission and vision as a team. So in order to achieve that mission and arrive at the vision, we have strategic objectives, and we identified 5 of those. And I'm just going to cover the next couple of slides with this one slide on the screen, if that's okay. So like I said, we have 5 strategic objectives. The first one is to implement audit management software. Okay, so right now we're working with Microsoft Office Suite. So we're using Excel, we're using Microsoft Word, and we're doing our processes manually. So we're hoping to implement software. And to do that, our goal was to implement the software to improve efficiency and reporting capabilities. And the key initiatives to get there was to release an RFP by Q1 of this year, which we did. So our RFP is currently live. And then we hope to have the software procured and implemented by December of this year. So currently the RFP is live and proposals are due back on the 11th of June. And our performance metric for that strategic objective is to have that software fully deployed and in use by Q1 of next year.
Can I ask what the budget is?
I don't know if to disclose, because we don't want, the bids to be influenced.
Oh, I see.
right? So,
It's like a Trump negotiation.
we want the best value at the least cost, so if we put out budget. it
I
will
understand, I
influence.
understand. That makes sense.
But it was approved.
No, I'm just kidding.
It was approved. It was approved by the board. So our second strategic goal is to develop our people, right? We could have a fantastic system, but we still need good people to man the system. So our second strategic goal is to develop and expand staffing resources. So our goals for that would be to increase staffing to support the growing organizational needs, and address specialized audit areas, specifically IT audits. And that's one of the mandates from the new standards is that, so prior to the new standards, we as auditors just had to have a working knowledge of IT audits because it was considered a specialized area. But now we're required to be able to perform IT audits independently. So
Dave,
we're,
one question,
yes.
industry standard for auditors by staff number, like 1 per 50, what's the standard industry wise for a pension fund? Just curious.
Okay, for a pension fund, I mean, I don't know that there's such a standard. It just depends on the mandate, right? Like, what are you auditing? How many audits do you want to produce a year? What's on your plan? So the staffing resources will change, ideally will change based on the number of audits that you want to perform. But because of the way things are set up here, right, we determine what to perform based on the staffing resources that we have. So I don't think there's an industry number out there for like what you asked. But I mean, I did request headcount in this budget, so.
I know.
We'll see, but I don't think that, I haven't seen like a set number.
Gotcha, thanks.
So, Daniel, we can ask NCBERS to survey that question.
Oh, that's a good idea.
What I will say is, at least among the 5 city systems, the audit shops are about the same size that we have or smaller, right? So, yeah, so one of the other systems recently started their internal audit function, maybe within the last 2 years, right? And just like us, they're growing. But then the fewer people you have, the less coverage you have. So that's a trade-off.
Thanks for that.
So our goals here will be to perform, like I mentioned, increase staffing to allow us to perform IT audits in-house. We want to be able to do that by 2028. We want to implement annual employee training and development programs. Melissa will help us with that. And then we want to be able to perform and document our quarterly employee feedback cycle, which we're already doing in our team. And then the key initiatives and timeline that will help us with our staffing resources will be to recruit and onboard 2 additional auditors by Q1 of this year. We onboarded 2 consultants, but we're hoping that with headcount can have FTEs as opposed to consultants, because there's a limit, like their systems they don't have access to.
Right.
And there are limitations there. And then we want to recruit and onboard 1 auditor with IT audit experience by Q1 of next year. Again, develop training plans to provide auditors with targeted training specific to their needs, and to hold those quarterly EFC check-ins. Performance metrics will be seeing an actual increase in our staffing levels from 3 to 5. Currently, we have 3 FTEs. We want that to go up to 5 or 6 if it passes. And then we'll have that IT auditor onboarded by Q1 of next year. And then we want to have 100% completion rate for our EFCs on a quarterly basis, which we currently have.
We do have.
Yeah, so we're doing that on a quarterly basis, meet with the teams individual, meet with staff members individually, and then I'll do a skip level check-in and just do a one-on-one also to see where the employee is and bridge any gaps. So our third and fourth strategic objectives I'll discuss together. So the third one is to increase the number of audits performed annually by 2028 and also reduce average audit completion time to 3 to 4 months. So to do that, our goals will be increasing the number of, so currently we're focused on the areas that are high priority from our risk assessment. So I want to be able to bring in areas that are medium priority as well. So by 2028, I want to be able to do with my team 5 high risk areas and 2 medium risk areas or more by then. And we want to be able to leverage the audit software that will be implemented to streamline processes and improve communication with management to hopefully get those responses to audit requests in a more efficient and timely manner. So key initiatives and timeline will be that we will have milestone tracking integrated into our internal assessment. So when it comes to assessments, the IIA requires 2 types. So the external and the internal. So internal is where us as a team will rate our performance, track our timelines and our effectiveness. Look, we conduct surveys to see how, our audits are being received by the auditees and things like that. And then once every 5 years, we're required to undergo an external assessment. So that's basically us being audited. And currently we have an RFQ that's live for that assessment to happen.
Auditing the word auditees, because I don't know if that's.
So we also want to have workflow automation by the end of this year. And we want to fully adopt electronic work papers for real-time collaboration by the end of this year as well. And our performance metrics will be seeing an actual increase in the number of audits performed by 2028. And we want to increase the percentage of audits that are completed in a 3 to 4 month time frame to 90% by 2028. And for the external assessment, we should have that starting, I believe, this summer. So we're still in the process of, I think the vendor that was selected is going through the procurement process where they have to register and do all of that before they can be contracted to do the work. So that in a nutshell is our strategy. I'll be happy to take any questions, comments, suggestions, any changes you'd like to see.
Well, thank you, Day. That was very thorough as we come to expect from you. And any questions for Day? The next item is committee discussion. So we could continue that on, and I just have to say, can I have a motion to consider committee agenda item 6?
Motion.
Second.
Are there any issues regarding what was discussed here today that need to be discussed further? Does anyone have any additional comments or questions?
Can I get a little detail on what we talked about from the executive committee last week? The 8 million from the 1450 retired deceased accounts or deceased members.
Oh, deceased members, that update?
Yeah.
Josias is the best person to give you any update on that.
Leave that for.
That's for regular board.
Okay.
Yeah, we're continuing to improve our, death match.
And that's an issue for all the pension funds even. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the pension funds I know about they were in the Move It hacked. They were part of the death notices were part of the hack.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a huge issue. I won't say what pension fund it was, but it's one that we know. It's close by.
I mean, that reminded me of the fraud situation that you had brought up about 2 audits ago where
Yep.
And so that's what it triggered that question of me, like the ability to fraud.
It's something we struggle with because the data source, which used to be the Social Security Administration.
Yeah.
They no longer publish that data. We have to get it from alternative sources. And we just recently got that contract. What was it, about 6 months ago?
Right, LexisNexis, they're using LexisNexis. They started doing that last year, actually, around
Yeah.
March of last year.
Was it that long ago?
The major company that was doing, I think, was the English company. I think that's why I think data was being sent, going the other way. And then sending it back to us based on the data. And that, but
It's, I can ask Josias to provide you some background information on that update.
Or if
That's,
we have any more concerns about federal involvement in giving this information, like if Doge has any say of
Well,
any data that comes our way,
we
then
no longer rely on Social Security for that. Social Security, like almost 10 years ago, stopped publishing their death match files. So that was a problem when actually, it's more than 10 years ago. They stopped when I was in Washington in the Obama administration. They stopped like a year before I arrived in Washington.
and there's no other data that we require.
LexisNexis, and they basically, or other services which are basically looking at local death notices that are being published or being filed medically. Yeah. Yeah, it's a problem.
I'm to self-create match company. Okay,
Yeah.
serious
luck with that.
you know.
Yeah.
Well, I just have to say, particularly with an activist board, like we hope to be or want to be or say we are. The audit function is really important because, having our ducks in a row, we can't challenge the system if our ducks aren't in a row. So I appreciate being part of this committee. I appreciate all the work that you guys do. And I appreciate the fact that our senior management is so open to it and doesn't kind of restrain you and will take it on the chin if they need to. So I appreciate that.
Some background, before a day created this department, there was no, there were allegedly internal auditors historically. There are no records of any internal audits. The day has created the entire foundation of the background of all this and done a great job. And a great job also includes adding workload to operations. So she's not only protecting members, but she's adding to the workload.
That's important. I mean, it's important. It's important, right? It's a trust would verify. And it's a vital role, I think, particularly when we know politically that there's often eyes on our fund more than there are others.
Yeah.
And having that a day bow from her and her team, I should say, it's just for the big team behind is a very important. So thank you very much for being so detailed and around stuff that maybe, doesn't seem so exciting on the outside, but it's really, really, really sincerely important.
Thank you. And thank you for giving us the resources because, we wouldn't be able to do it without having the resources that we need. So
On one hand helps the other, I suppose. With that, I think our agenda is completed. This concludes the agenda. The next meeting of the Audit Committee of BERS Trustees will be scheduled for the third quarter of 2025 and communicated to all committee members and invitees. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second, but we'll give it up to Margie. So she was here today. And any all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.